I would talk to my granddad sometimes about what life was like when he was younger. And he told me this story, which I believe, and then I talked to my dad this morning. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm making it up, or maybe he was messing with me. But my granddad told me this story, how when he was just out of college, around that age, he worked at a factory. And on the way home, he would work so hard at the factory all day, he wouldn't eat. And on the way home, he would stop at this like Derriette sort of grill restaurant place, and he would order his dinner. And he would order every night 10 hot dogs for dinner. And he would eat them. We should have had him come up for that hot dog eating contest. I think he would have done okay. That didn't amaze me, although that was pretty crazy for me. What amazed me was he told me the price. 10 hot dogs for $1. And I used to think that's crazy. And he would tell me about how cheap other stuff was. A Coke cost a nickel, right? A candy bar was a nickel. A movie, a nickel. I think everything was a nickel, apparently, back then. But I thought that was wild because I was a working man at 10, 11, 12. I had a paper route. And I had just spent my hard-earned 50 cents on a Surge in a bag of Cheetos. And I thought how nice it would be if things would be so cheap. It was expensive back then. Well, little did I know what was coming, right? Life. I saw this chart on social media. I thought I could share it with you. It just talks about how much prices have changed, especially recently in fast food, all right? Just McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, Taco Bell. It was not long ago, the end of 2019, that a cheeseburger was $1. Now it's over $3. French fries was $1.79. Now it's over $4 at McDonald's. $8 for chicken fingers at Chick-fil-A. That's wild. And then if everything else failed and I had $2 in my pocket, I used to be able to count on Taco Bell. But the last fortress has fallen. Even Taco Bell costs a lot. And it's not just fast food, is it? It's everywhere we feel this. Groceries. We feel it in car insurance. We feel it in housing. My goodness. The prices keep going up and up and up. And people are stressed. We're stressed about money. In a recent survey, 64% of American adults said that finances were a significant source of stress or a major source of stress in their life. Not just that things are a little tight, not just that, we've had to buckle down a little bit, but 64% say it's a major stressor. And over again, you see these studies which show that when we feel stress as parents, our kids feel that stress. They feel that insecurity. And financial stress continues to be a leading indicator of couples that are headed for marital problems or divorce. Stress is serious. And we see what the Bible talks about, what God talks about. And God did not design us to live our lives stressed out. He didn't. Nowhere in the Bible does it talk about the stress of God. There's no Bible verse. There's lots of verses that talk about the peace of God, right? And it's a peace that surpasses all understanding, we read, which means that it's a peace that's not dependent on the stock market. It's not dependent on how bad inflation is. It's a peace that's not dependent on whether your 401k is doing well or you got the raise that you thought you were getting. This peace is available to us in spite of economics. And yet we see there's something wrong because we're stressed. I don't think it's going to surprise anyone to find out that when we see something wrong, I look to the Bible to find answers and truth about life and about God's purpose for us and his meaning and his plan. And I love how James, the brother of Jesus, in James chapter 1, he calls the Bible a mirror, right? And you think about a mirror. You look in a mirror to do what? You straighten up your clothes. You make sure everything's looking good. You check your teeth, make sure there's nothing in there. Nothing in there from lunch earlier. You check your hair, or I used to check my hair in a mirror, not so much anymore, right? You look at it to see what's out of place. And that's what the Bible does in our life too. It cuts through all of the superficial. It shows us how things really are, and it leads us to a place where we can begin to recognize what is out of place. When we feel stress, we can know for sure that something is out of place. That's not God's plan. So today, we're going to be talking about StressLess Finances. That's our topic. Intensely practical. We're going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 6. So if you've got a Bible, turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6. If you didn't bring a Bible, that's okay. We'll have it up on the screen behind us. Are we ready to go today, church? All right, let's dig into God's word together. 1 Timothy chapter 6. We're going to start in verse 6. Now, there is great gain in godliness with contentment. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pangs. Okay, so if we're talking about finances and financial stress, you might think that we need to be talking about economics. But what God's word seems to be showing us is that we actually need to look behind that, and we need to try to look at the heart. God's word cuts through all of that practical stuff. I'm stressed because I didn't get a raise. I'm stressed. No. We got to look at the reason behind the reason. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Like if I went to the doctor and I said, Doc, my knee is killing me. You know, I'm there because of that pain, but that pain is caused by something. Maybe it's my shoes don't fit right. Maybe I decided all of a sudden I'm going to start working out and I didn't ramp up correctly. Maybe it's just that I've been sitting on my butt for 15 years and things have gotten a little out of shape. But there's a reason for that pain. And financially, with us, there's a reason why we're stressed. There's a reason why we make decisions that we make, why we shop when we're stressed. There's a reason why we buy things that we can't afford to impress people we don't even really care about, right? There's a reason we do those things. And so what we're trying to get to in this passage is what that reason is. Now in verse 6, we read this really simple phrase. There is great gain in godliness with contentment, but godliness with what, church? Contentment is great gain. Then we go to verse 7. For we brought nothing into the world, we can take nothing out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. I think that one of the heart reasons that we're learning about here in this passage, one of the reasons behind the decisions that we make that cause us stress with our finances is that we are discontent. We're discontent. Now, when you think about that word, discontent, what does that mean? It means, simply put, that I'm not satisfied with what I have. I'm not satisfied with where I'm at. I have a wandering eye. I'm looking to see maybe what else is out there, what other people have. I find myself looking at those things and wishing that I had those things. That's discontentment. And the Bible is saying here, God is telling us that discontentment with where you're at is actually causing problems. Now, in this passage, it's really interesting how the Apostle Paul gets to verse 6, right? There's always something before the text here. He's talking to Timothy. Timothy is a young pastor, and God is inspiring Paul to write this letter, and he's warning in the previous verses about these false teachers. And he's saying that there are these false teachers out there who are doing things for the wrong reasons. Just to paraphrase, there's a whole lot you could read there, but he's saying like they want a platform. They want influence. They long to be known as someone who is wise. They want everyone to be impressed with them. And then you get to verse 5, which is right before that. He says that they are imagining that godliness is a means of gain. And then Paul goes and he says, but we know that godliness with contentment is the real gain. That word gain, it's a financial term. You can think about it as profit. You can think about it as income. You can think about it as money. These false teachers are thinking, man, if I can just gain influence in the church, if I can just gain a following, I can exploit this and I can actually make a lot of money with it. Unspoken there is that money will then be the thing that brings them happiness. The Apostle Paul is telling us, God is telling us, no, money isn't the thing that's going to bring you happiness. Godliness with contentment is actually something money can't even buy. That's great gain. We are sold a lie, church, in our culture. We live in a very materialistic culture, and we're sold a lie, which tells us that we just need more, bigger, better, shinier, newer. And that will be the thing that brings us contentment. There was an article by a man named Greg Easterbrook in Time Magazine. And in Time Magazine, he looked at studies from around World War II, so maybe like the mid-40s, all the way up through present day. And he examined economic factors across the board. And what he found, he said, was that by any economic standard, we are better off today than we were during World War II. Wages are up. You can buy more with your money. Goods are cheaper. Your houses are twice the size on average. Now we have not just 2-car garages, we have 3-car garages. Everybody has air conditioning. Most families have multiple vehicles. The vehicles are nicer and they last longer. I can go on and on and on. Every single thing, the chart goes just up and to the right. Everything is skyrocketing except for happiness. It's flat. No matter how our world might lie to us, these genius marketers will try to convince you that if you can just have that next thing that you don't currently have, that will be the thing that brings you happiness. It's just not true. There's nothing to back that up. Instead, we see that godliness with contentment is great gain. So what do we do? Well, I believe that you can actually learn to be content. When you find yourself, it's a habit that you have to change. It's an attitude, a mentality. We are so conditioned and trained to just look at what other people have all the time. Commercials are in our face constantly. We are constantly being asked to buy newer and bigger and better. And yet, here's the mentality that we're encouraged to have. In verse 7, we read, we brought nothing into the world, and we can't take anything out of the world. Now, if you keep that in mind, that will change your mentality about that new purchase that you really can't afford anyway. You brought nothing into this world, and all of that stuff that you work so hard for, that new truck or that new car or that new house on the beautiful piece of property, the designer clothes and the nice Jordans and all the stuff that you buy, you can't take any of it with you. It's all temporary. You will never see. I've seen a lot of funeral processions. I've never once seen the hearse pulling a U-Haul behind it. It stays, and your kids are going to have to deal with it. And that is the source. That discontentment leads us into this situation where we buy and we accumulate. And then that accumulation, we then worry about those things. We stress over those things. We stress about working hard to pay off of those things. And then we see in verse 8, the Apostle Paul, he's writing to Timothy. He says, listen, here's the standard. If you have food and clothing, with these, be content. Man, does God provide for us, church? Man, has God ever left you wanting? Jesus promises us that if we seek first the kingdom of God, everything that we need will be added to us. He doesn't say that everything that you want will be added to you. He doesn't say that the newest iPhone will be added to you. He says that everything that you need will be added to us. It's a mentality shift and a change. And you might think, man, that just goes against every little bit of your being to think, well, I should just be content with food and clothing. But, I mean, that's where we find peace. Contentment is peace. If you're tired of stressing out about your finances, there's a heart issue called discontentment that we have to work on. It's a root cause of some of the decisions that we make that end up putting us in these financially stressful situations. as Dylan just read in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11 through 13. Now, I love this passage, but this week when I was studying, I thought about it differently than I ever have before. We're going to read this again. He says in verse 11, well, we'll just start in 10. I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you revived your concern for me. Paul is writing to a church in Philippi. Now, you indeed were concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. That means they didn't have a chance to tell him about it. He says in verse 11 now, not that I'm speaking of being in need. I'm not writing you because I need something. For I have learned in whatever situation I am to be what? Content. I know how to be brought low. That means I'm poor. And I know how to abound. That means I'm wealthy. In any and every circumstance, that's not circumstances dependent on your finances, right? In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing both plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Now, what encouraged me so much about this passage, which I've read a million times, I know you have too, what encouraged me so much was that Paul wrote in verse 11 that he has learned how to be content. It's not something you're just born with. He learned, and we can learn too. If we can take an eternal perspective that I brought nothing into this world with me and I'm taking nothing away with me, if we can learn this perspective that the God that I serve will take care of every single need that I have, as long as I'm seeking his kingdom first, if we can learn that, draw close to him, then we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, then we can be content, whether we have a lot or we have a little. And if you're talking about removing stress from your finances, contentment's the place to start. Now, we're going to talk about what it means to work hard, use the gifts that God has given you, increase in wealth, because the Bible talks about those things too. But for now, I just want to get to the second heart issue because I'm running a few minutes behind here. The second heart issue we see starting in verse 9. He says, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation. Now, I want you to just think of all of the negative things that he says here next, okay? Those who desire to be rich fall. Falling is bad. They fall into what? They fall into temptation. They fall into a snare. They fall into many senseless and harmful desires that then plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. That means the love of money can give root. It sprouts when it grows up. It can flower. It can produce fruits of all different types of evils. They can all come from that one desire. And it's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pangs. I think that one of the heart reasons why we end up stressed about money is that we love money. I think we are discontent and we love money. I have listened to, I've been on occasion to churches where like the desire to be rich is almost like the point of the sermon, the message. It's almost like, hey, this is why I follow Christ, healthy, wealthy, happy. And I don't think, because I've read the Bible front to back lots of times. Like, I don't believe that to be rich or to be wealthy is sinful in any way, okay? But you would be a fool to read a passage like that and not think that it's at least dangerous, that your heart is in danger. As you accumulate more, as you work hard, as you use the gifts that God has given you, you have to understand that inside of that pursuit of gain, inside that pursuit of wealth, your heart is vulnerable. You have to protect it. You need accountability. You need steps in place. You need people who will check you because that love of money can drive you to making some financial decisions or decisions about stress that wreck you. I mean, plunged into ruin and destruction can't be much more clear, can it? Now, when I was young, there were times where I think I desired to be rich. I was thinking about that this week. I grew up in a family. There were 6 of us. Most of the time, there was a single income. Mom and dad took care of us. All of our needs were met. I didn't grow up in a dirt floor shack in Kentucky or anything, okay? But a lot of times, and I know a lot of you can identify with this, we had what we wanted, but that was about it. We had what we needed, but that was about it, rather. There's a lot of times where I wanted stuff, and there was just no way I was getting it. Now, I had a friend whose life was very different than that. His dad was the CEO of a big company, a Fortune 500 company. They had houses, yes, plural. They had nice cars. They just lived a very different life. Like, I would go over to his house and hang out in the guest house at his house, right? It was just a different world. Now, they were so kind. They never, made you feel less than. They weren't people like that at all. But I remember one time they invited me on a vacation to one of their vacation houses. And we're out on this boat, and I've spent a week just in this luxurious situation where I've just never imagined. I hadn't seen how those people live, and I just thought, I could do this. I could be rich. And I see now, that's a dangerous thought, right? That desire for wealth without any sort of recognition of contentment is a dangerous thing. You can pursue your business. You can grow your business. You can use your gifting. You can get those promotions. You can move up the ladder, but you have to check your heart for contentment. The word that, I just want to draw your attention to it one more time. The word that he uses in verse 8, or actually verse 9, he says, but those who desire to be rich, they fall into a snare. I'm not really much of a hunter, but I've watched that show Alone. I don't know if any of you have seen that. Those guys are snaring stuff left and right. I know enough about this to know when you create a snare to trap an animal, if you're going for a rabbit, you got to put some type of bait in it that a rabbit would want. If you're trying to snare a coyote, you got to put what a coyote would want. You realize that what he's saying is we have an enemy. Now, we know in 1 Peter that our enemy prowls around like a roaring lion. He's seeking to devour you. We know from the book of Ephesians, okay, that our enemy is shooting fiery arrows at us, but not only does he prowl around, not only does he seek to devour, not only does he shoot fiery arrows, he's setting snares. And he's baiting it. And the bait that he puts in for us is that allure of wealth, riches, money. And you better be careful you don't fall into it. We have to check our hearts for contentment. Now, what I love here is that right away, we read, if you jump down to verse 17, he starts talking about people who are rich. And these are people within the church, okay? So you see that there are people within the church that have wealth. It's not sinful, but he has instructions for them. In 1 Timothy 6:17, he says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. Every bit of wealth that we have, every bit of money that we earn, every bit of riches that we accumulate is a result of God providing it to us. That's the mentality. So don't be haughty about the money that you have, and don't rely on that money. You brought nothing into this world. You can't take anything out of this world. It's from God and God alone. And then he says this, they're to do good. Be rich in good works. Be generous. Be ready to share, and thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. You can truly have money and take hold of that which is truly life. You just have to take those extra steps. You have to protect your heart. Now, I want to just get intensely practical. I know we don't have a ton of time here, but I want to talk about how you can protect your heart with StressLess Finances. Okay, we're going to rush through some of this. I get that. There's really only 3 things that you can do with money. And I know that this is elementary stuff, but if you're stressed about finances, we're going back to the beginning, back to the basics. You can spend money. We're good at that one. Right? You can save it or invest it, or you can give it away. Ultimately, those are the three things that you can do with money. Spend it, save it, give it away. If all you ever do is save, you never enjoy your money at all, you never go out to a dinner, you never spend anything, you're buying used underwear from Goodwill, right? Something is wrong with your mentality with money. It's not healthy. But if all you ever do is spend, hey, YOLO, I only live once. I'm put it on this card, put it on that card, use that card to pay off this card. If all I ever do with that, and I never save any, that's not healthy. And then ultimately, even if you get a little more balanced, you save some, you spend some, if you're never giving it away in order to help people, that's not healthy either. So we need to do all three things if we're going to have stressless finances. Okay, the first thing that I want to encourage you to do is probably going to come as no surprise, but this is a heart issue. The first thing that you need to do with money, if you want to be healthy, is to give to God. God is the one who richly provides us with everything. We just saw that, right? In 1 Timothy 6, verse 17, it is God who richly provides for us everything to enjoy. It's all God's anyway. And in the Bible, consistently now, the Bible talks about obedience in this manner of giving. When God gives to you, you need to give back a portion of that to God. Traditionally, that was called a tithe. Now, we're not getting into that whole thing today, okay? But a tithe, 10%, was considered this baseline idea. The New Testament then takes another step and talks about generosity. Now, I don't think that there's generosity without the baseline obedience. You can't tell me that it's generous for me to give 1% away and to keep the other 9% for myself. No, I think generosity is above the baseline obedience. We also read this. In Luke chapter 6, Jesus says this, "Give, and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. It'll be put into your lap, for with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." Okay, so there's really two things here. There's this passage in 1 Timothy that we're talking about. And in this passage, we read that God gives us everything. We're not to set our hopes on our riches, but we're to do good with them, to do good works, to be generous and ready to share, to store up treasure for ourselves, to have a good foundation for the future, and to take hold of that which is truly life. All of those things happen when you give. That sounds pretty awesome. And then you read what Jesus says in Luke chapter 6. He says that when you give generously, God gives back to you. Now, I don't think that that's like a slot machine, okay? You put in coins and you get more back. How it is that God rewards you and blesses you may not be financially, but God will bless you. So if you want to be blessed, if you want to take hold of that which is truly life, not this materialism that masquerades as real life, if you want to take hold of that which is truly life, you have to be giving. For me and my family, it's really simple. Every month, if you're looking how to start, we look at how much income came in that month, and it's variable for us. Jara is a real estate agent. My salary is the same, but some months she'll sell a house, some months she won't, and we just take whatever income came in, and we start by multiplying that by 10%. It's usually one of the biggest checks we write each month, and you know what it does? It removes stress from my life because I know I'm being obedient to the Lord. I know that I'm taking hold of that which is truly life. I don't feel guilty about spending when at first I've given back to God. And it's the first step that you need to take. It's getting yourself in line. It's recognizing that God truly is the source of all good things. The second thing you need to be doing is saving for the future. If you want to know my scriptural citation for this, just read the whole book of Proverbs. We'll read one of them. Proverbs 21:20 tells us this: "Precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it." Now, this is a different type of society, okay? They didn't have paychecks from the boss. Sometimes they would have a harvest, and whenever they would bring in that olive oil, what this is saying is the guy would sell some of it. He would bring some treasure into his house as a result. He would keep some of it. He would save some of it so that there was always oil and there was always treasure in his house. But a fool would take his whole harvest, sell everything, and spend it all. It's foolish not to save. Save for your kids' education. Save for your retirement. Save. Invest in the future. Now, that's not a lack of faith. That's biblical. Now, how does that remove stress? A lot of the things that we call emergencies aren't emergencies. I'm going to step on some toes, okay? I don't know any of your situations, but you know you have a deductible for your healthcare plan. So, if you get injured and you weren't expecting it, that is an emergency. The fact that you have to pay that deductible isn't. You know it's there. You need to save up so that when that injury comes, you've got the money to pay your deductible, and now you're not paying off cards. Now you're not putting it on credit. Now you're not calling your family and asking for a loan. Your car, I've never met one that lasts forever. It's not an emergency when you need 4 new tires. Tires wear out. Save. And then when it happens, it's not, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm up at night. I'm crunching numbers. I'm trying to. No. Those aren't emergencies. Do you see what I'm saying? We treat them as emergencies. They're not. Your HVAC system, your AC is going to go out someday. That's not an emergency. We need to save and invest. And when you have those things there, when that problem comes, when you need those 4 tires, it's just like, all right, here's the check. That's why I saved it for. Done. I'm not stressed about it. I'm not worried about it. I'm not paying 27% interest on their card for it. My stress are gone. It's gone. Lastly, I want to challenge you with this. Budget to live. I give to God first. I save and invest so that now I'm not stressed. Okay, I know I'm being obedient. I'm being obedient to the Lord. I'm taking hold of that which is truly life. I'm being blessed in return by the Father. Now I'm saving for the future. I'm investing for these things that I know are coming, so there's no more emergencies that are hitting me that way. And then lastly, I budget for the future. Now, I used to think of budget as like a cuss word. I'll be honest. Don't say that word in here, right? I used to feel like budgets were things that prevented me from doing what I wanted with my money. But I've come to have the exact opposite view. I think that a budget, far from being the thing that prevents me from doing what I want with my money, a budget is the thing that actually ensures that I do the things that I want to with my money. Because when I wasn't budgeted, do you know how I spent my money? It wasn't how I wanted to. It was my stomach dictated it. These marketers dictated it. My emotions dictated it. But now when you budget to live, you actually can decide what matters most. Where do I want my money to go? How will it impact eternity? Lord, what is it that you want us to focus on? Who is it that you want us to be? And when you have that budget in place, there's not this stress all the time over finances. At its heart, it's an issue of contentment first. We need to make sure that we don't love money, secondly, but then we need to make sure that we are people who are following in just a biblical process of giving to the Lord, saving and investing for the future, and budgeting to live. And I promise you will drop out of that 64% that is constantly stressed about money. And man, that's what we want, isn't it? I'm tired of being stressed. God has given us the roadmap to get out of that. We just have to take hold of it. And this works whether you have an hourly job or whether you're salaried. It works. Would you just pray with me this morning? Lord, we just thank you for today. God, I'm so grateful for all that you have done for us, for your provision. Ultimately, Lord, whether we have plenty or whether we have nothing, God, we know that in you we have all that we need. Jesus, I thank you for just showing us not just who you are, but showing us how we can live in this life. God, I pray that our church won't be a place where people are stressed out about finances, but instead that we're walking in the peace that you promise. Jesus, we love you, and we ask all these things in your name.